The apartment on Friedrich-Ebert-Strasse sat quiet in the pre-dawn hours of September 7th. Inside the third-floor unit, Sandra Müller moved through the cramped kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing coffee she would never drink. Her hands, small and deliberate, arranged 2 cups on the counter before she caught herself. Only one person would need coffee this morning. Her husband Klaus had already decided that for her. Outside, Hamburg was beginning its slow wake. Delivery trucks rumbled past the residential block. A distant siren wailed somewhere near the port. The city carried on, indifferent to the decision being made inside apartment 3B, where a 29-year-old mother was about to walk into an arrangement that would cost her everything. Sandra had been awake since 4. Sleep had become difficult these past months, ever since Klaus lost his job at the logistics company. Ever since the bills started piling up faster than his unemployment checks could cover them. Ever since he started making phone calls in the hallway, speaking in low tones she was not supposed to hear. She heard them anyway. The walls in these old Hamburg buildings were thin, built for a time when people had less to hide. She stood now at the kitchen window, watching the street below. A cat picked through garbage near the building entrance. Across the street, Frau Weber's lights came on. The elderly woman beginning her day with the same rigid punctuality she had maintained for 40 years. Sandra envied that consistency. Her own life had become unpredictable, shaped by decisions she no longer controlled. Klaus emerged from the bedroom at 5:15, already dressed. He wore the dark jacket she had bought him 2 Christmases ago, back when money was easier and his temper softer. The jacket still fit, but the man inside it had changed. His face carried the tight expression of someone who had made calculations and did not want them questioned. They did not speak at first. Sandra poured his coffee. He drank it standing up, checking his phone repeatedly. The blue light from the screen made his features look hollow, ghost-like. She wanted to ask him if this was truly necessary, if there was not another way. But she had asked before, and his answers had grown sharper each time. The last conversation ended with a door slammed, and her shoulder bruised from where he shoved her against the wall. She learned to stay quiet. At 5:30, Klaus finally looked at her directly. His voice, when it came, was flat and businesslike, as if discussing a grocery list rather than what he was about to make her do. "Jean will be waiting at the address I gave you. He is expecting you by 6. Do not be late." Sandra felt her stomach tighten. Jean-Baptiste, the Haitian man Klaus had met through some network she did not fully understand. Klaus said Jean had connections, that he could help with Klaus's debts, that he knew people who could arrange work permits, housing, maybe even a way to fix the mess Klaus had made with the wrong creditors. But Jean's help came with conditions. This morning was one of them. Sandra had met Jean-Baptiste once before, briefly, at a café near the Reeperbahn. He was tall and soft-spoken, with careful eyes that took in everything. He did not leer at her the way some men did. He did not make crude jokes or touch her without permission. That almost made it worse. It would have been easier to hate him if he were obvious in his intentions. Instead, he was polite, professional. He treated the arrangement like a transaction, which Sandra supposed it was. Klaus had explained it simply. Jean needed companionship. He was lonely in Hamburg, far from his family in Port-au-Prince, navigating a foreign country where he barely spoke the language. He wanted company, intimacy, the feeling of being wanted. In exchange, he would help Klaus. He would call in favors. He would make certain debts disappear. It was, Klaus insisted, a fair trade. Sandra did not feel it was fair. But fairness had stopped being part of their marriage long ago. She picked up her small backpack from the chair, the same one she used for grocery shopping. Inside were the things Klaus told her to bring. A change of clothes, toiletries. Her phone, though Klaus had warned her not to use it unless absolutely necessary. Jean preferred discretion. He did not want records, screenshots, evidence. This was to remain private, a moment that would dissolve once it ended, leaving no trace. Klaus walked her to the door. Before she could reach for the handle, he grabbed her wrist, not hard but firm enough to make his point. "Do not embarrass me, Sandra. John is doing us a favor. Be grateful." She met his eyes then, searching for some flicker of the man she had married 6 years ago. The man who laughed easily, who brought her flowers from the market, who promised her stability and protection. That man was gone, replaced by someone who measured her worth in terms of utility and obedience. She pulled her wrist free and opened the door without answering. The hallway was still dark, lit only by the weak emergency light near the stairwell. She descended the 3 flights quickly, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Outside, the morning air was cold and damp, typical for Hamburg in early autumn. She pulled her jacket tighter and began walking toward the U-Bahn station. The address Klaus had given her was in Altona, a neighborhood she knew only in passing. The instructions were specific. Take the U3 to Altona station, walk north for 10 minutes, look for the red brick building with the green door, apartment 2A, knock 3 times, wait, then knock twice more. Jean would let her in. Sandra boarded the train at 5:42 a.m. The car was nearly empty, except for a man sleeping across 2 seats and a young woman in hospital scrubs staring blankly at her phone. Sandra sat near the window, watching the city slide past. Advertisements for language schools and insurance companies blurred together. She thought about her daughter, Lena, sleeping safely at her mother's house across town. Klaus had insisted Lena stay there this week. He said it was easier, that they needed space to figure things out. Now Sandra understood the real reason. He did not want Lena to see what her mother was about to become. The train reached Altona at 5:58 a.m. Sandra stepped onto the platform and followed the exit signs. The neighborhood was quiet, a mix of old residential buildings and newer developments pushing up along the waterfront. She walked north as instructed, counting streets. Eine Straße, Zweie Straße, Dreie Straße. The names blurred together. Her heart pounded harder with each block. At 6:04 a.m., she found the building. Red brick, just as Klaus had described. The green door was scuffed and faded, the paint peeling near the hinges. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring up at the second-floor windows. One of them glowed with soft yellow light. Jean was awake, waiting. She climbed the steps to the entrance and pressed the buzzer for apartment 2A. The intercom crackled. "Yes?" Jean's voice, accented but clear. "It is Sandra." The buzzer sounded, unlocking the door. She stepped inside, into a narrow hallway that smelled of old wood and cleaning solution. The stairs to the second floor creaked under her weight. At the top, apartment 2A's door stood slightly open. She pushed it wider and stepped inside. Jean-Baptiste stood in the small entryway, dressed in jeans and a plain grey shirt. He smiled gently, the kind of smile meant to put someone at ease. It did not work. Sandra's stomach twisted tighter. "Thank you for coming," he said, closing the door behind her. "Please sit. Would you like coffee?" Sandra nodded, not trusting her voice. She moved into the small living room and sat on the edge of the couch. The apartment was tidy but sparse, the furnishings minimal. A single photograph sat on the side table, showing a woman and 2 children. Jean's family, she guessed. The people he had left behind. Jean brought coffee in chipped ceramic mugs. He sat across from her, maintaining distance, as if he understood how fragile this moment was. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of traffic outside and the distant clatter of a neighbor's morning routine. Finally, Jean broke the quiet. "I know this is difficult for you. Klaus explained your situation. I want you to know that I do not take this lightly." Sandra looked up at him, searching his face for cruelty or mockery. She found neither. Only a strange, sad sincerity that made her feel even worse. "Then why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why ask for this?" Jean set his mug down carefully, considering his words. Because I'm tired of being alone. Because in this country I am invisible. People look through me. I exist to serve, to work, to stay quiet. For one morning, I wanted to feel like someone saw me, like I mattered. Sandra wanted to tell him that she understood loneliness, that she too felt invisible in her own marriage, reduced to an object Klaus could trade when convenient. But she said nothing. Understanding would not change what was about to happen. Jean stood and extended his hand. "Come," he said gently. "Let us not make this harder than it needs to be." Sandra took his hand and followed him toward the bedroom. Behind them, the apartment door remained unlocked. Neither of them noticed. Outside, the city continued its morning rhythm, unaware that in a small apartment in Altona, a transaction was taking place that would soon turn into something far darker. By 6:30 a.m., Sandra Müller sent her last text message. It was to Klaus. 3 words. "I am here." He responded immediately. "Good. Stay as long as he needs." Then silence. By nightfall, Sandra would be dead, and Hamburg would have another unsolved case to add to its growing list of women killed by men they trusted. The bedroom was smaller than Sandra expected. A double bed dominated the space, neatly made with plain white linens. A single window overlooked the street below, curtains drawn halfway, filtering the morning light into pale strips across the floor. The room smelled faintly of cologne and something else, something Sandra could not quite identify. Loneliness, perhaps. The particular scent of a space inhabited by someone trying to make a temporary place feel like home and failing. Jean-Baptiste stood near the dresser, his posture uncertain despite his earlier composure. Sandra remained by the doorway, her backpack still on her shoulder, her body rigid with tension. She had imagined this moment dozens of times since Klaus first told her what he expected. In her mind, it had been quick and mechanical, something to endure and forget. But now, standing in this quiet room with this quiet man, she realized nothing about this would be simple. "You do not have to be afraid of me," John said softly. "I will not hurt you." Sandra wanted to believe him, but trust had become a luxury she could no longer afford. Klaus had promised he would not hurt her either, back when they first started dating. That promise lasted exactly as long as it took for him to feel secure in her dependence. The first time he hit her was 3 months after their wedding. The second time was easier for him. By the 10th time, it was routine. She set her backpack down on the chair near the window and turned to face John directly. If this was going to happen, she needed to control what little she could. She needed it to be on her terms, even if those terms were dictated by circumstances beyond her power. "Klaus said 2 hours, she stated, her voice steadier than she felt. "After that I leave," Jean nodded slowly. 2 hours, yes, that is what we agreed. He moved to the bed and sat on the edge, his hands folded in his lap. He looked suddenly vulnerable, this tall man in his own apartment, waiting for a woman who did not want to be there. Sandra wondered what desperation looked like from the inside. If Jean felt as trapped as she did, if his loneliness was its own kind of cage. "May I ask you something?" Jean's voice broke through her thoughts. Sandra shrugged. "If you want." "Do you hate me?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected many things this morning, but not honesty, not vulnerability. She considered lying, but exhaustion made her reckless. "I do not know you enough to hate you," she answered, "but I hate what you represent. I hate that my husband values me so little that he can trade me for favors. I hate that you accept this trade. I hate that I am here at all." Jean absorbed this without flinching. "I understand. If it helps, I hate this too. But we are both here because we have no better options. That is the truth, yes?" Sandra wanted to argue, but she could not. He was right. They were both trapped in systems larger than themselves, systems built on desperation and exploitation, where people became currency and dignity became negotiable. Klaus needed Jean's connections. Jean needed Klaus's willingness to offer what Jean could not obtain through normal channels. And Sandra, she was simply the payment. The commodity exchanged between two men trying to survive in a world that offered them no grace. She moved to the bed and sat beside him, maintaining distance, but no longer standing apart. If they were going to do this, she would not cower. She would not give Klaus the satisfaction of her complete submission. "Tell me about them," she said, gesturing toward the photograph she had seen in the living room. "Your family." Jean's expression softened. "My wife, Marie. My daughter, Anaïs. She is 7. My son, Pierre. He is 4. They are still in Port-au-Prince. I send money every month. I'm trying to bring them here, but the paperwork, the requirements, it is impossible without help." "And Klaus promised to help you with that?" "He said he knows people in the immigration office, people who can move applications faster. But everything here requires payment. Money I do not have, so we made our arrangement." Sandra felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat, but swallowed it. "You miss them. Every day, every hour. Do you have children?" "A daughter, Lena. She is 5. Where is she now?" "With my mother. Klaus thought it was better if she was not home this week." Jean nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for further explanation. Both of them were parents. Both of them were doing things they hated to protect or provide for children who would never know the cost. The silence that followed was different from before, less hostile, more resigned. Two people sitting side by side in a situation neither wanted, both too tired to fight against the current pulling them under. Jean reached out slowly, giving Sandra time to pull away. When she did not, he took her hand. His palm was warm and rough with calluses. Working hands, honest hands. She wondered what those hands had built, what they had created before they learned to take what was offered in rooms like this. "I need you to understand something," Jean said quietly. "I am not a monster. I do not believe I am. But this city makes monsters of us all eventually. It takes what we were and replaces it with what we must become to survive." Sandra squeezed his hand once, an acknowledgement, if not quite forgiveness. "I understand that better than you think." What happened next unfolded with a gentleness Sandra had not experienced in years. Jean did not demand or take. He asked, and when she hesitated, he waited. There was no violence in his touch, no cruelty in his words. It was, in its own terrible way, the most respectful intimacy she had known in her marriage, which made it somehow worse, because it reminded her that tenderness still existed in the world, just not in the home she returned to every night. Afterward, they lay separate on opposite sides of the bed, both staring at the ceiling. The clock on the nightstand read 7:43 a.m. 51 minutes remained of their agreed time. Sandra felt hollowed out, not from what had just happened, but from the weight of all the choices that led her here. Every compromise, every moment she swallowed her voice, every time she stayed when she should have left. "Do you want to leave now?" Jean asked. "You do not have to stay the full time." Sandra considered this. She could leave. She could walk out of this apartment and never return. But then what? Klaus would be angry. The favor would be incomplete. Jean would withdraw his help. The cycle would continue, perhaps with worse consequences. "I will stay," she said. "We had an agreement." Jean turned his head to look at her. "You are stronger than you think. I see it in you. Strength does not matter if you cannot use it." "Maybe. Or maybe you are waiting for the right moment. Maybe we all are." They spent the remaining time talking. Small things, meaningless things. Jean told her about Port-au-Prince, the markets near his childhood home, the music that filled the streets during festival season. Sandra told him about Lena's love of drawing, the way her daughter could spend hours creating elaborate fantasy worlds with colored pencils. They spoke like two people who might have been friends in different circumstances, if their lives had not been shaped by desperation and compromise. At 8:30 a.m., Sandra gathered her belongings. Jean walked her to the door, his expression unreadable. "Will Klaus ask you to come again?" he asked. "I do not know. Would you want me to?" Jean paused, considering. "I do not want this for you. But if the choice is between this and worse, then yes, at least here you are safe." Safe. The word tasted strange in Sandra's mouth. She was not safe. She had not been safe in years. Safety was an illusion sold to people who still believed the world operated on fairness and justice. She left the apartment without saying goodbye. The morning had progressed while she was inside. The streets were busier now, people heading to work, children walking to school. Normal life continuing around her while she carried the weight of what she had just done. She felt marked somehow, as if everyone she passed could see through her clothes to the transaction written on her skin. She texted Klaus from the U-Bahn platform. "It is done. I'm coming home." His reply came 30 seconds later. "Good. Jean called. He is satisfied. He will help us now. See, I told you it would be fine." Sandra stared at the message until her vision blurred. Fine. As if anything about this was fine. As if she had not just sold a piece of herself to solve problems Klaus created. As if her body and dignity were simply tools he could deploy whenever necessary. She boarded the train heading back toward Friedrich-Ebert-Straße, her reflection ghost-like in the dark window. She looked the same as she had this morning. Same face, same clothes, same tired eyes, but something fundamental had shifted. A line had been crossed, and once you cross certain lines, there is no walking them back. She did not know it yet, but she would never make it home. Because Klaus had made additional arrangements, agreements Sandra knew nothing about, favors within favors, debts layered upon debts. And Jean-Baptiste, for all his gentleness and sad sincerity, was not the only man Klaus had traded her to. By noon, Sandra Müller would be dead, and the investigation that followed would reveal a network of exploitation far darker than anyone could have imagined. Sandra reached the apartment at 9:17 a.m. The building looked exactly as she had left it 3 hours earlier, but everything felt different. The stairs seemed steeper, the hallway darker. She stood outside the door for a full minute before inserting her key, bracing herself for whatever version of Klaus waited on the other side. He was sitting at the kitchen table when she entered, laptop open, phone face down beside his coffee mug. He looked up briefly, his expression neutral, assessing. Sandra set her backpack down and moved toward the sink, needing something to do with her hands. "How did it go?" Klaus asked, his tone casual, as if inquiring about a grocery run. It went. Sandra turned on the faucet, filled a glass with water she did not want. "Jean said he would help you now, so we are done, yes? This does not happen again." Klaus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "That depends." Sandra's stomach dropped. "Depends on what?" "On whether Jean keeps his promises, on whether his connections actually work. These things take time, Sandra. You know this. You said once. You said if I did this once, it would be enough. I said it would help. And it did. But there are other debts. Other people I owe. You think Jean is the only one who can make our problems disappear?" Sandra set the glass down hard enough that water sloshed over the rim. "No, I am not doing this again. Find another way." Klaus stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He crossed the small kitchen in 3 steps and stood close enough that Sandra could smell the coffee on his breath. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, which was always worse than when he yelled. "You do not get to decide what you will or will not do. Not while you live in my apartment. Not while I feed you and put a roof over your head. Not while your daughter depends on the money I provide. You barely provide anything anymore. We are drowning because of your mistakes, Klaus. Your debts, your bad decisions. His hand moved so fast she barely registered it before his palm connected with her cheek. The slap was not hard enough to knock her down, but sharp enough to make her eyes water. She touched her face, feeling the heat spread across her skin. "Watch your mouth," Klaus said quietly. "I am trying to fix this, but I need you to cooperate. Just one more time. After that, we will be clear. I promise." Sandra wanted to laugh at the absurdity of his promises. They meant nothing. They had never meant anything. But arguing would only make things worse, and she was too tired to fight. "Who?" she asked, her voice flat. "Someone Jean introduced me to. Another Haitian. His name is Marcel. He has money, connections in shipping. He can move products without customs issues. That kind of access is valuable, Sandra. If I can secure his help, we can start fresh. Real fresh." "And what does Marcel want?" Klaus shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "The same thing Jean wanted. A few hours of your time, that is all." Sandra felt bile rise in her throat. "When?" "Today. This afternoon. He is expecting you at 2 o'clock. "Today? Klaus, I just came back from Jones. I cannot just—" "You can, and you will." His voice hardened. "Marcel is leaving Hamburg tomorrow. This is our only chance. Do not ruin this because you are being dramatic." Sandra stared at him, searching for any trace of the man she once loved, any flicker of remorse or humanity. She found nothing, just cold calculation and entitlement. She was not his wife anymore. She was inventory, an asset to be deployed when needed. "Where?" she asked, defeated. "Wilhelmsburg. Industrial area near the docks. I will text you the address. Take the S-Bahn, it is faster. And Sandra?" He grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Do not embarrass me. Marcel is not as patient as Jean. Be smart." He released her and returned to his laptop as if the conversation was finished. Sandra stood frozen, her cheeks still stinging, her mind racing through possibilities. She could refuse. She could walk out right now, take Lena from her mother's house, and disappear. But where would they go? She had no money, no job, no family willing to take them in long term. Klaus had systematically isolated her over the years, cutting off friendships, discouraging employment, making her dependent on him for everything. She was trapped, completely and utterly trapped. At 1:30 p.m., Sandra left the apartment again. Klaus did not look up from his screen. She took the S-Bahn south toward Wilhelmsburg, watching the city transform from residential neighborhoods to industrial sprawl. Warehouses and shipping containers replaced apartment buildings. The area felt desolate, purposely removed from the parts of Hamburg tourists saw. The address Klaus sent led her to a grey building wedged between two larger structures. No signage marked it. A single metal door faced the street, dented and rusted at the edges. Sandra checked the address 3 times, certain there was a mistake. This did not look like a place where people lived. It looked like a place where things were stored and forgotten. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. The door opened abruptly, and a man filled the frame. He was shorter than Jean but broader, with thick shoulders and hands that looked capable of serious damage. His face was impassive, his eyes cold. "Sandra?" His accent was heavier than Jean's, his German rougher. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. Marcel stepped aside, gesturing her in. The interior was worse than the exterior. A single large room dominated by stacked crates and industrial shelving. A makeshift living space occupied one corner, a mattress on the floor, a hot plate, a folding table with 2 chairs. The smell of diesel and rust hung thick in the air. "Klaus said you would come," Marcel said, closing the door behind her. She heard a lock click. "He said you were cooperative." Sandra forced herself to breathe steadily. "He said 2 hours, like with Jean." Marcel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Jean is soft, too much feeling. I am not like Jean. We will take the time we need. Fear spiked through Sandra's chest. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Jean's apartment had been odd but safe. This place felt dangerous, isolated. No neighbors to hear anything, no windows facing the street, just concrete walls and locked doors. I should go, Sandra said, backing toward the door. I made a mistake. Klaus should have talked to you first. Marcel moved fast, blocking her path. Klaus talked to me plenty. He told me you were worth the favor. Do not make him a liar. His hand clamped around her wrist. Sandra tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. Panic flooded her system. She had endured Klaus's violence for years, learned to anticipate it, to minimize it. But this was different. Marcel was a stranger. She did not know his limits. She did not know what he was capable of. Please, she whispered, please, I have a daughter. I need to go home to my daughter. You will go home when I say you can go home. He pulled her deeper into the warehouse, away from the door, toward the makeshift living area. Sandra's mind raced. She needed to think, needed to find a way out. But her body felt disconnected from her thoughts, moving through space without her permission, dragged forward by a force she could not resist. She did not know that in 3 hours, Klaus would receive a call that would change everything. She did not know that Marcel had no intention of keeping his agreement. She did not know that this afternoon would be her last. All she knew was that she had made a terrible mistake, trusting that Klaus would protect her. And now, locked in a warehouse in Wilhelmsburg, with a man whose eyes held no mercy, Sandra Müller understood that some traps have no escape. Marcel dragged Sandra toward the mattress in the corner. She twisted against his grip, her survival instinct finally overriding the paralysis of fear. Her free hand clawed at his arm, nails digging into skin, drawing thin lines of blood. He barely flinched. "Stop fighting," he said flatly. "You are only making this harder." Sandra opened her mouth to scream, but his other hand clamped over her face, cutting off sound before it could form. He shoved her backward onto the mattress. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Before she could recover, his weight pinned her down, his knee pressing into her chest, making it impossible to breathe properly. "Klaus told me you were obedient," Marcel said, his voice conversational despite the violence of his actions. "He said you knew how to behave. Was he lying?" Sandra could not answer, with his hand covering her mouth. She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her temples into her hair. Marcel studied her for a long moment, then slowly removed his hand. "Please," Sandra gasped. "Please, I will do whatever you want. Just let me breathe. Please." Marcel eased his weight slightly but did not move away. "That is better. See, we can be civilized about this." There was nothing civilized about what happened next. Marcel took what he wanted without negotiation, without the gentleness Jean had shown, without any pretense of mutual arrangement. This was not an exchange. It was an attack. Sandra disappeared into herself, her mind separating from her body, floating somewhere above the mattress where she did not have to feel or think or exist. When it was over, Marcel stood and adjusted his clothes as if nothing significant had occurred. Sandra remained motionless, staring at the ceiling, her body aching, her mind blank. She heard water running somewhere, Marcel washing his hands in a utility sink across the room. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, as if this were just another ordinary afternoon. "You can go now," Marcel said. "Klaus will call me tomorrow. We will discuss whether this was sufficient." Sandra sat up slowly, every movement painful. She reached for her backpack, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the straps. Marcel watched her with detached interest, the way someone might observe an insect struggling on its back. "Tell Klaus his wife is very accommodating," Marcel added. "He should be proud." Something inside Sandra snapped. The numbness that had protected her cracked open and rage poured through. She stood, clutching her backpack, and for the first time in years, she spoke without fear of consequences. "You are a monster," she said, her voice raw but steady. "Both of you, Klaus and you. You are both monsters, and I hope you suffer for what you have done." Marcel's expression did not change. "Everyone suffers, Sandra. The only question is who suffers more. Today it was you. Tomorrow it will be someone else. That is how the world works." Sandra turned toward the door, desperate to escape before her courage failed. But as she reached for the handle, Marcel spoke again. "One more thing. Klaus owes money to other people, not just me. Did he tell you that?" Sandra froze, her hand on the door. "What are you talking about?" "There is a Russian, Dmitri. Klaus borrowed from him 6 months ago. High interest. Klaus has not paid. Dmitri is not a patient man. Why are you telling me this?" Marcel shrugged. "Because Klaus is a coward. He will use you to pay that debt too. And Dmitri is not like me. He does not let people leave when he is finished with them. You should know what is coming." Sandra felt her remaining hope dissolve. "Then what do I do?" "You run, tonight. Take your daughter and disappear. It is your only chance." "I have no money, nowhere to go." "Then I suppose you are already dead. You just do not know it yet." Marcel unlocked the door and pulled it open. Afternoon light flooded the dim warehouse, painfully bright after hours in the shadows. Sandra stumbled outside, gulping fresh air, her vision swimming. She heard the door slam shut behind her, the lock clicking back into place. She walked blindly for several blocks before her legs gave out. She collapsed against a concrete wall near a loading dock, her body shaking uncontrollably. Workers passed by without stopping, accustomed to seeing broken people in this part of the city. She was invisible, just another casualty of a system that ground people down and kept moving. Sandra pulled out her phone. Her mother had called twice. Lena wanted to talk to her. Sandra stared at the missed call notifications, unable to press the button that would connect her to her daughter's voice. What would she say? How could she explain where she had been, what she had done? Instead, she called Klaus. He answered on the third ring. "It is done," she said before he could speak. "Your favor is done. But I am not doing this again. Never again. Do you understand me?" There was a pause. "Marcel called me already. He said you were difficult." "Difficult? He attacked me, Klaus. What Jean did was one thing, but Marcel got what he needed. That is all that matters. And yes, Sandra, you will do this again if necessary. Dmitri still needs to be handled." "No, I will not. I am leaving. I am taking Lena, and I am leaving." Klaus laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "With what money? You have nothing. You are nothing without me. Where exactly do you think you will go?" "Anywhere. Anywhere is better than this." "Then go." "But you are not taking Lena. She stays with me." Sandra's blood froze. "You cannot keep her from me. She is my daughter. And you are an unfit mother, a woman who prostitutes herself to pay her husband's debts. Do you think any court will give you custody when they learn what you have been doing?" Sandra felt the world tilt. He was right. He had trapped her completely. If she left, she lost Lena. If she stayed, she lost herself. There was no winning. There had never been any winning. "I hate you," she whispered. "I know," Klaus replied. "Come home. We will talk about Dmitri tomorrow." The line went dead. Sandra sat against the wall as afternoon turned to evening, watching the sky fade from blue to orange to black. Workers finished their shifts and went home. Trucks rumbled past. The city continued its indifferent rhythm. At some point, Sandra stood. She started walking, but not toward home. Not toward her mother's house. She walked toward the water, toward the industrial port where ships came and went, carrying cargo to places she would never see. She thought about disappearing, about stepping into the dark water and letting it take her somewhere Klaus could never follow. But she thought about Lena, her daughter's laugh, her small hand reaching up to hold Sandra's. The drawings Lena made, always featuring the two of them together, smiling under a bright yellow sun. Sandra could not leave her daughter alone with Klaus. Whatever happened next, she had to survive it, for Lena, only for Lena. She turned away from the water and began the long walk back. She did not know that Klaus had already made arrangements with Dimitri. That tomorrow morning she would receive an address in Harburg, that this time there would be no gentle Jean, no predictable Marcel. This time she would not come home at all. Sandra returned to the apartment near midnight. Klaus was already asleep, or pretending to be. She moved through the dark rooms like a ghost, showering until the water ran cold, scrubbing her skin raw, trying to wash away what could not be washed away. She did not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the empty street, waiting for morning, dreading what it would bring. Klaus found her there at dawn. He set a cup of coffee beside her without speaking, a small gesture that might have seemed kind in another life. But Sandra knew better. This was preparation. He needed her functional for what came next. "Dimitri wants to meet you today," Klaus said finally. 10 o'clock, Harburg Industrial District. Sandra did not look at him. "And if I refuse? Then Dimitri comes here. He collects what I owe in other ways, ways that involve broken bones and burned apartments. Is that what you want?" "What I want does not matter. It never has." Klaus crouched beside her chair, forcing eye contact. "After this, we are clear. Dimitri is the last one. I promise you, Sandra, after today, this ends." She met his gaze and saw the lie immediately. There would always be another debt, another favor, another man waiting. This would never end as long as she stayed. But leaving meant losing Lena, and that was impossible. "What kind of man is Dimitri?" she asked quietly. Klaus hesitated. "He is direct. Do what he asks, and it will be over quickly." "That is not what I asked." "He is not like Jean," Klaus admitted. But Marcel exaggerated. "Dimitri just wants his money's worth." Sandra laughed bitterly. "His money's worth. That is what I am now. Currency." Klaus stood, uncomfortable with her directness. "The address is on the table. Do not be late. And Sandra, take a taxi. Do not use public transport. Dimitri values discretion." At 9:30 a.m., Sandra stood outside their building waiting for the taxi. She had dressed carefully, choosing clothes that covered as much as possible, as if fabric could protect her from what was coming. Her backpack held nothing this time. No change of clothes, no toiletries. Just her phone and wallet. Somewhere in her mind, a decision had crystallized. This would be the last time. One way or another, after today, she would not do this again. The industrial district in Harburg looked like Wilhelmsburg's uglier cousin. Abandoned warehouses clustered near the railway tracks, their windows shattered, walls covered in graffiti. The taxi driver gave her a concerned look when she asked him to stop. "Are you sure this is right address, miss?" Sandra nodded. "I am sure." She paid and stepped out. The taxi drove away quickly, leaving her alone in the desolate street. The building Dimitri had specified stood at the end of a dead-end road, a 3-story structure that might have been a factory once. Now it was just another hollow shell where bad things happened away from witnesses. She found the entrance and climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. A metal door stood open, revealing a large, empty room with concrete floors and exposed ceiling beams. In the center, a man sat in a folding chair, smoking a cigarette. Dimitri. He was older than Marcel, mid-50s perhaps, with grey threading through his hair and deep lines around his mouth. He watched her approach with calculating eyes. "Klaus's wife," he said in heavily accented German. "You are late. The traffic—" "I do not care about traffic. Close the door." Sandra obeyed, her hands trembling. The door's slam echoed through the empty space. Dmitri stood slowly, grinding his cigarette under his heel. He circled her once, appraising, then stopped directly in front of her. "Klaus owes me 15,000 euros, plus interest. That is 22,000 now. You understand this debt?" "Yes?" "Good. So you understand today does not clear it. Today makes installment payment. Klaus will still owe me. But maybe I give him more time if you are cooperative." Sandra's stomach turned. He said today would end this. Dmitri smiled without humor. "Klaus says many things. Most are lies. You know this, yes?" Before Sandra could respond, Dmitri grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a door at the back of the room. She tried to resist, but he was stronger, his grip bruising. He shoved her through the doorway into a smaller room, darker, with only one small window near the ceiling. "Please," Sandra begged. "Please, I have done everything Klaus asked. Just let me go. I will disappear. You will never see me again." "That is true," Dmitri said quietly. "I will never see you again." Something in his tone made Sandra's blood freeze. This was different from Jean, different even from Marcel. This was not about transaction or favor. This was something else entirely. Something final. Dmitri moved toward her and Sandra backed against the wall, her mind screaming for escape, but her body paralyzed. She thought of Lena, her daughter's face, her laugh, the drawings she made. "I'm sorry, baby," Sandra whispered to the empty air. "Mommy is so sorry." What happened next unfolded with terrible speed. Dmitri's hands around her throat, her desperate struggle, the world dimming at the edges. Then nothing. When Klaus's phone rang at 3:47 p.m., he was watching television, a beer in hand. The voice on the other end was cold and factual. "Your debt is paid differently now. Your wife will not be coming home. If you want to avoid joining her, you leave Hamburg tonight. You do not contact police. You do not ask questions. You disappear. Understood?" The line went dead before Klaus could respond. At 6:15 p.m., firefighters were called to a burning vehicle in a remote area near the port. Inside, they found human remains, burned beyond recognition. Female. The fire had been set deliberately, accelerant used to ensure complete destruction. It would take investigators 3 days to identify the body through dental records. By then, Klaus Müller had vanished, and Sandra's mother was left to explain to a 5-year-old girl why her mother was never coming home. Detective Maria Hoffmann stood beside the burned vehicle, watching the forensic team work in the early morning light. 23 years on Hamburg's police force had shown her many horrors, but something about this case felt particularly cruel. The accelerant pattern suggested the fire had been set deliberately, meant to destroy evidence and identity both. Someone wanted this woman erased. The dental records came back on September 10th. Sandra Müller, 29 years old, mother of one, resident of Friedrich-Ebert-Straße, reported missing by her mother 48 hours earlier when she failed to pick up her daughter as promised. The mother, Frau Schneider, had provided a detailed statement. Sandra had been acting strangely for weeks, withdrawn, frightened. She had mentioned her husband's debts but refused to elaborate. When detectives arrived at the Müller apartment, they found it abandoned. Klaus had left in a hurry, clothing still in closets, dishes unwashed in the sink. His laptop was gone, his phone disconnected. Neighbors reported seeing him leave the night of September 7th carrying a single suitcase. He had not been seen since. Hoffmann interviewed Frau Schneider in her small apartment in Altona. Little Lena sat in the next room, coloring quietly, unaware that the investigation happening beyond her sight was about her mother's murder. The grandmother's hands shook as she poured tea, her voice breaking repeatedly. "She wanted to leave him," Frau Schneider said. "She told me months ago. But Klaus controlled everything. The money, the apartment, access to Lena. Sandra felt trapped." Did she mention anyone else? Friends of Klaus, people he owed money to? Frau Schneider hesitated. She said something once about men Klaus made her meet, foreign men. I did not understand what she meant. I should have asked more questions. I should have protected her. The investigation expanded. Hoffman's team traced Klaus's known associates, financial records, phone logs. A pattern emerged. Klaus Müller had accumulated significant gambling debts over 18 months. He had borrowed from multiple sources, each more dangerous than the last. When legal options dried up, he turned to Hamburg's underground networks, communities operating outside official systems where favors replaced currency and desperation bred exploitation. Two names surfaced repeatedly in Klaus's communications. Jean-Baptiste Laurent, a Haitian immigrant working in shipping logistics. Marcel Dubois, another Haitian national with suspected connections to document fraud. Both men were interviewed. Both denied extensive contact with Klaus or Sandra. Jean-Baptiste broke during his second interrogation. He admitted Sandra had visited his apartment once, at Klaus's arrangement. He claimed it was consensual, a mutual agreement between adults. He seemed genuinely disturbed when informed of Sandra's death, his shock appearing authentic, but he refused to provide details about others in Klaus's network. Fear kept him silent. Marcel Dubois was harder. He had no permanent address, no official employment, no digital footprint beyond burner phones that went dead after single uses. When police finally located him in a warehouse in Wilhelmsburg, he was preparing to leave Germany. His only comment was through a lawyer. My client acknowledges meeting Klaus Müller once for business purposes. He never met Sandra Müller. He has alibis for all relevant dates. This harassment must cease. The third name proved impossible to trace. Dmitri. No last name, no address, no confirmed identity. Multiple Dmitris existed in Hamburg's Russian community, but none matched witness descriptions or timeline. He was a ghost, or possibly not even real. Klaus may have invented him, using the threat to control Sandra. Or Dmitri was exactly what Marcel suggested in that warehouse, the final creditor who erased problems permanently. By October, the investigation stalled. Klaus Müller remained missing, likely fled to another country under false identity. Without Klaus, investigators could not prove Sandra's death was murder rather than suicide or accident. The autopsy revealed she died from asphyxiation before the fire started, suggesting foul play. But without witnesses or physical evidence tying specific individuals to the crime, prosecutors declined to file charges. Detective Hoffman prepared the case summary with deep frustration. This was not justice. This was bureaucratic failure. Sandra Müller had been exploited, abused, and murdered. Her killer or killers walked free. Her daughter would grow up without answers, without closure, without the mother who loved her desperately enough to endure hell. On November 1st, Frau Schneider organized a small memorial for Sandra. 20 people attended, mostly family, and a few old friends Sandra had lost contact with during her marriage. They released white balloons near the Ulster, each balloon carrying a message for Sandra. Lena's balloon said simply, "I love you, Mommy." Hoffman attended off-duty, standing at the edge of the gathering. She watched the balloons rise into grey Hamburg sky and made herself a promise. She would not close this case. Not officially, not mentally. Somewhere Klaus Müller was living under a new name, pretending his past did not exist. Somewhere the men who exploited Sandra continued exploiting other women. As long as Hoffman carried a badge, she would watch for them. The case file remained active, but dormant. Occasionally tips came in, usually leading nowhere. Someone thought they saw Klaus in Berlin. Another reported Dmitri in Munich. Nothing verified, nothing actionable. Sandra became another statistic, another woman killed by the systems that should have protected her. Her mother raised Lena alone, working 2 jobs to provide stability. The girl grew up knowing her mother died, but not understanding how or why. Frau Schneider decided some truths were too heavy for children to carry. Maybe someday when Lena was older, she would learn the full story. But not yet. Not while she was still innocent enough to believe the world was fundamentally good. Years passed. The city moved on. New crimes demanded attention, but occasionally, on quiet afternoons, Detective Hoffman would pull Sandra's file and review it again, looking for missed connections, overlooked evidence, anything that might crack the case open. She never found it. Sandra Müller's murder remains unsolved, Klaus Müller remains missing, and in Hamburg's immigrant communities, women continue meeting men their partners arrange, hoping to survive transactions that sometimes turn deadly. The system that failed Sandra continues failing others, and justice, incomplete and distant, waits for a reckoning that may never come. Sandra's story is not unique. It is not even rare. It is simply one of many tragedies hidden in plain sight, buried beneath poverty, desperation, and the casual cruelty of men who view women as commodities. Her voice was silenced, but her daughter lives. And perhaps that is the only justice Sandra ever wanted, to survive, and to ensure her child survived after her, even if she could not.